Hey everyone, and welcome to the tutorial series for the Procedural Park. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the utility and bonus blueprints. Specifically, a blueprint called HISM utility. HISM stands for Hierarchical Instance Static Mesh. Several no spawn zone blueprints that allow you to basically prevent foliage from spawning in a certain area. A simple fence blueprint, a translucent water that allows you to create a lake, a river blueprint, and eventually a water walkway blueprint. So if I go ahead and jump into Unreal, we're back at our level tutorial, and I just have a little park here. The very first one we want to use is going to be under Blueprints, Tools, and it's called BPHSM Utility. But before we do this, let's go ahead and just create a random park. So I'm not gonna spend too much time here. I just want to go ahead and spawn my flowers, my foliage, my additional props. Why not? Let's just put some birds. And now notice that we have our park, and you know what, for good measure, let's go ahead and apply our path material here. Again, we're going really quickly. You should by now be very familiar with all of these different processes. But if I click play here, even though I'm getting pretty good performance, all of the foliage, wow, I've forgotten that based on the previous video, I've changed the scale of the butterflies, so now there are massive butterflies flying around our park. You know what? Let's just go ahead and leave it like that. That's cute. But if you look at the foliage, you'll see that they're individual actors, right? And again, the reason we do that is because you have the power here to move them, delete them, do whatever you want with them, right? So let's assume that you wanted to create a little clearing here, and you say, you know what, I forgot, I have another asset that I want to create here, whatever it is. At this point, you can actually click on the trees and you can physically remove them this way, right? And that would be okay. But let's say that you're good now and you say, right now, I think I'm going to finalize my park and I want to convert my foliage to hierarchical instance static meshes, and the same thing for all my props, right? Instead of having individual static meshes, I want to create hierarchical instance static meshes. So you go here and you convert your props and you convert your foliage. And now notice that when I select trees and anything else, they're all one single mesh or hierarchical instance static mesh. And this is where the utility blueprint called HISM utility comes into play. So let's say that I changed my mind and I wanted to create a clearing here. Well, right now it's not really possible because when I click here, I select all of the trees. There is a way for you to go into the specific component here and try to figure out from the array which instance is the tree, but that is very, very difficult and probably not advisable. You could use a plugin like the instance, I forget what the name, there's a plugin that allows you to individually target instances from the editor here. If you have that, then great, you could do that. But assuming that you don't, how do you target a specific tree for removal or anything else? And that's where this comes into play. So go ahead and drag it, and I'm gonna place it right here. And notice that with this selected, there's like a little sphere. And right here, I'm gonna zoom up here, there's a setup section and a setup spawn section and a few buttons. The first thing is the setup is gonna allow you to change the radius of the trace. It's going to allow you to grab an actor reference, and you can even debug the trace. So what's gonna happen here is, let's say that I wanna create a clearing for the trees. I can select the actor reference by using the little dropper tool here and click on the trees. And now we have all of the trees selected. And now we say, I actually want to remove instances of the trees wherever this circle is. So if I zoom out here and I click on remove instances, notice that the trees that are inside this volume have been removed. So this is a way for you to remove instances out of a special volume. right? You can also add instances by clicking on the add, which is going to basically add in a random pattern inside the volume. You can remove it, or you can eventually even change the material. That's it. It's very simple, but I wanted to give you guys a way of changing or removing or adding instances once you do the conversion. Now let's say, for example, that I wanted to create a little path, right? I'm going to make this a little smaller, and I say, you know what I want to do is I want to create a little path. I'm going to make it even smaller here, from here all the way here, right? And this is just going to be with the dirt texture, right? That's cool. But notice now that even though we don't have the trees, we have these flowers, right? And the flowers are also hierarchical instance static meshes, right? Just simply one called PP Grass 3. So we can use our utility here to trace the path and remove those flowers. So we can just change the trace radius to something smaller, like 500. And we can use the eyedropper tool here and say, actually, I want to try to select the flowers. So grab the eyedropper tool, and you see that we've selected the grass 3 flowers. And now we click remove instances, and notice that the flowers are now being removed, oops, along the path. So you can always go after the fact and remove the flowers or the grass that way. This is even more important for the flowers because the flowers always spawn as hierarchical instance static meshes. You could technically do it with the trees before before you convert the trees, you could do it, but you could never do it with the flowers because the flowers by default are instanced. So this is a way that you can create a path after the fact and clear flowers. Notice that there are other flowers here, and that's because that's a separate flower type. So you would have then to use the eyedropper tool, select these guys here, which is grass 2, and then you can remove it. So because we have 2 different flower types, each flower is a separate instance static mesh, so keep that in mind. And you would have to select each one, and then you can trace the pathway. There we go. And now if I click play, notice that now my path is completely free of flowers and trees, except this little area here, which I forgot, but you get the idea. If you open the level park, which is the big park, as a sample, you'll see that I've created several different pathways just from the texture. I did not use a mesh like I did this, and that's how, and I used this utility to make sure that I removed all of the flowers and the trees that were around that area on purpose. So it's really, really useful. The other useful utility here is that you can change the material, right? So let's say that you wanted to change the material of these lights here. You could then grab the eyedropper tool, select the lights, and now you notice that we have, it's called props 10. You could remove the instances here, you could add instances, but in this case I want to change the material. So to change the material, we go on to setup material, and we say for this, let's see if we can find the material for the light. So if I start typing and I say lights, you'll see that we have park lights, and then you have a few, including park light standard, which is the yellow. But there's another material that I've included for this specific purpose called park lights off. And if you click here and you click on change material, whoops, let me go ahead and go back. Nope, I can't. Let's go back to light standard and change the material. You're supposed to change the material index here, which I completely forgot. So yeah, let's let's do a quick do-over here, just to show you guys what I mean. But I forgot to change the material layer here, so let's just go ahead and spawn our props. And in this case, we're going to convert our props to hierarchical instance static meshes right here. And if you open this guy here, just to show you what happened here, right? If I went to meshes, park, and we're gonna go for, let's see, props. And this is the actual mesh that is spawning. Notice that we have two material elements, element 0 and element 1. So what happened was that here, when I selected this guy, when I select them here, right? What I did is I selected the material, and I selected the material index 0, which is actually the black part. So in this case, I would want to change it to material index 1, and then change park light off. And now if I click here, notice that the lights are now off. So good thing that it happened when it happened, because this may happen to you and you may be wondering what the heck's going on. So obviously, depending on the mesh, you may have a bunch of different materials applied. In this case, for the light, is element 1, which is what you would add here, material index 1. So if I want to turn them on again, go back and say material light standard, and then change material, and the lights are on. Simple enough. All right, so that is the Blueprint HISM utility that you see here. I wanted to cover it first because this is very, very useful, again, for creating clearings, taking out the flowers that spawn, or if you needed to spawn grass, you can take out the grass and create a little pathway that way as well. And also change the material, which I think is really neat. All right, let's go back to our list here. The other one is the no spawn zones, right? So let's go back to Unreal, and in this case, I'm gonna move this guy away, and just to show you guys, instead of trying to do the entire park, let's just spawn some foliage, right? If you spawn foliage, it'll spawn pretty much anywhere because there are no obstacles, right? So the idea here is that you would create your own obstacles in specific shapes. So if you go to Blueprints, Tools, No Spawn Zones, you see that we have several different shapes here automatically pre-made. So you have a cylinder, you have a pyramid, which is basically a triangle, but if you look down here, you'll notice you have a rectangle or a square, and then you have a torus, which has the little, it's like a little donut here, and this is pretty much what you would expect. You can change the scale. I'm gonna keep it uniform here and change it to like a 4. Whoops. Right here, the scale here. Make sure that you select the actual element here. So instead of 20, let's make it like 40. 40, oops. Sorry. You have to do it here under setup, which is why it wasn't letting me. It's been a little while. 40 by 40. That way you actually don't have to select the element here. You can see the scale here. Let's do this triangle and make this 40 by 40 as well. And what happens now is if we try to spawn our foliage, and I'm going to spam a lot, you'll obviously notice that the foliage is not spawning in that area. So if I grab these guys now, and I move them down, for example, you'll see that now we have those areas free. So this is just very simple, but it just allows you to pretty much remove specific areas and reserve them so you don't have to clear them later on. That's it. That's all you need to do is just drag this guy here. And the other one is you have a spline. So this is basically almost like a pathway. Same thing as a pathway. You can grab the spline point and you can drag it out. And you can duplicate the spline points by holding Alt, grabbing, and going like this. And this way, you can create any shape you want. So you can see here, for example, doesn't really matter what shape it is. And when you spawn your foliage, and I'm going and doing it very quickly here, you can grab this guy, and when you move him out, whoops, you have that specific shape. So let's say that you had an idea of a specific path that you wanted to take, and you want the trees to all automatically not even cover that path. You could use this to actually create the path and not even have trees spawn in that path. Basically giving you the ability to do it before the trees spawn, and then you have to manually remove them, right? So this is a quicker way of doing it than using the HISM utility. If you use the utility, you have to do traces, and you have to basically manually trace it. So it's a lot less control versus doing it with the spline, and then you actually have the specific area that you wanted. Let's go ahead and remove everything. And that's pretty much the idea. It's just reserving an area where you don't want any of the foliage to spawn. Okay? All right, simple fence. This is going to take literally just a second here. If you go back to blueprints, tools, BP simple fence, just drag and drop to your level. And this is a spline based tool. Notice that if I zoom in here, I have a spline point here in white. If you click on the spline point and you just drag, notice how you're basically creating a fence. And if you duplicate the spline point, you can actually curve the fence. So you can see here. And duplicate it again, and duplicate it again. So you could fence your park if you wanted to, for example, or you could fence a specific area. The way I use this is mostly to put a fence around the lake. So if you wanted to create a lake, this would be a nice little blueprint to kind of put on the edge, so people don't fall on the lake, for example. Or if you wanted to, I use this on the Ferris wheel, for example, on the sample park. Around the Ferris wheel, you typically wouldn't want people going behind where the wheel is spinning, right? You only want to have a specific place for the entrance. So that's pretty much it. And of course here, if you go to the setup, you have a few options. You have a complete mesh and an incomplete mesh. So if you look at these meshes and you're good with modeling, you can change them at will, and then it'll change the mesh. You have a material, which in this case is just fence white. You can change it to whatever material you want. And then the tangent length is gonna basically determine how smooth are the curves that you're gonna have. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint here. The next one is the translucent water. And this, by the way, is not my blueprint. This is actually from Epic Games. So if you go to the Epic Content folder, Blueprints, go to Water, then you have BP Translucent Water, and you drop it here, and you see that it's just a plane and with a water material, right? So typically the way you would use this is you would carve your landscape. So come here, come to Sculpt, grab your sculpting tool, and in this case I'm going to make the strength a little lower, brush size bigger, and then if I wanted to create a little lake here, I'm just going to create on this side. I would hold shift and start dragging, and you can see here that we have created a little lake. Then you can use something like smooth if you wanted to make it a little smoother, right? And then after that, you can just grab this little guy here and lower it, and you can create your lake. And obviously you need to make sure that you cover the entire area. So you can see there's Y and X, and you can come here to the water X scale and the water Y scale. And in this case, I'm going to make this like 80. And that way I'm covering everything. And that's pretty much it. It's just a little water plane with the material so you can create your lakes. Obviously, you can see there's a bunch of settings here, like the water scale, the wave speed. I'm not gonna spend too much time here. You can even do the depth scale, base opacity. So if you want it to be, for this to be more transparent, you can make this like 0.8 and see that now you can see the bottom. You can change the color, obviously, to anything you want. Maybe this is a really dirty lake, yellow. and instead of this, maybe there's like a red tint. If you see that, you probably don't want to get in there, but you get the point. There's a bunch of little neat settings, and this is actually coming from the project, I think it's called Water Planes from Epic Games, and they have a few other samples. So this is just me including it in here because you may want to create your lakes. And talking about lakes, let me go ahead and reset the colors here. Talking about lakes, let's take a look at a blueprint called the Water Walkway. And you can go here under Blueprints, Tools, Water, Water Walkway, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag it to the edge here. And this basically creates like a little pier where people can walk through. And you can see that nothing's showing, but there's like a little spline point here. Go ahead and click on the spline and just start dragging. And when the blueprint is long enough, you'll see that it'll display a little pier, and you'll see that there's an end cap here, and you can also duplicate the spline points, and you can even curve it if you wanted to. So you can see here, and you want to drag it until you get to the point where you get that little cap at the end, and at that point you probably want to stop. And you can see here that I'm gonna drag this a little bit more here, that if I click play, then it's just a little walkway. You can also add support. So if you click on it, notice that we have under setup, we have the same idea as the fence. We have a complete mesh, which is the cap. We have an incomplete mesh, which is everything else. We have a material. We have the tangent length, and you have an option to add support. So if you click here, for every spline point that you have here, we actually add support that goes all the way to the bottom, right? And this is interesting because usually when you have like a little walkway like this, you will probably want to have support. So if you wanted to add more supports, you can simply right click, add spline point, and as soon as you do, notice that there's another support. If you move the spline point, the support will move with it. Simple as that. You also have the option of adding support at the last point, and the last point is this edge right here. If you click there, notice that now we have support at the edge. Again, very, very simple, but this is more like a little nice little bonus, and you can see it on my sample level, where if you have a lake, you have a few gazebos on the edge, you have a fence covering so people don't fall, and then you have like a little walkway that allows you to walk around the lake. All right, and finally, we're gonna have the river VP. This was also included as part of my procedural foliage placement tool, but I'm including it here because I think it's relevant. So you can go ahead and drag this guy here, and again, it's spline based. So zoom in there and click on the little blue spline point there, and you can just drag. And I'm going to put this guy a little bit higher. And you can see that as I am dragging, it's creating a little river plane. And I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate the spline points a little bit. And if I grab this guy, whoops, and I'm gonna put him on the floor, the neat thing here is that it will carve the landscape, right? So usually you would put it at the floor level, and then you would sink it a little bit more to whatever depth you wanted. And now it's under the landscape. And what you would do is you would come to the setup landscape, click here, select your landscape, and there's a bunch of settings here, like the depth, offset, the start width, etc. This is probably the most important one, the depth offset. This is basically going to make the river 100 units deep from the plane. So you can change this value to make it deeper or shallower. And then after that, you can even apply a landscape layer material. So in this case, let's apply number 3, which is the sand, and click on modify landscape. And when I do that, notice that the landscape changed, but the grass is still there. So once again, we want to make sure that we force Unreal to update the landscape material. And now when we click play, notice that we have a nice little river that it goes from very shallow and it's like a slope, it goes a little bit deeper and deeper, only at 100 units. Simple as that. If you wanted to make the river deeper, you can just select this guy and say, actually, I want the depth offset to be, I don't know, 500. You can click on Modify Landscape. And now, if I click play, notice that it's a lot deeper. 500 units deeper. And you would again have to update the material here. All right. There you go. You can also make the river wider by changing the river settings here. You can go to segment default and there's a start and an end scale. So let's say that you wanted the river to be a lot wider. You could change the scale to 2 and 2. And if I go up, nothing happens. So what you need to do is you need to click on reset river and select it again. And now the river is a lot wider. So if I go down here and again I click on modify landscape, you would have to then change your start width and end width here. So you can see that now you can make a wider river. So play around with the settings until you get the type of river that you want, but it should be hopefully pretty easy to figure out. And those are going to be the bonus blueprints that I'm going to be going through today. You notice that there's another folder called Showcase, and these are blueprints that I use on the Showcase level. I'm not going to take the time to go through them because they're very, very specific to the Showcase level, but feel free to take a look at how I have them set up. This blueprint basically displays a message, a little widget with a message. This teleports the player to a specific location, and if you open the camera folder here, I have two blueprints here. They are just a very, very simple camera system that I've used to record the little panning shots on the trailer. If you saw that at the end of the trailer, there's like a very smooth animation where a camera's like flying through the park and going to specific points of interest. That's what I use these two guys for. So if you open that level, I still actually left the blueprints there. You can see how I've set it up. Otherwise, it's very specific for just recording footage. So I'm not gonna go through those. All right, guys, and that is pretty much it for this video. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you in the next video.